Never assume the quiet parts of space are empty. That mistake is why millions of people are now watching the sky a little differently. And if you're here right now, hit subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is something NASA did not expect anyone to notice this early. There is something hiding under the solar system, something huge, and it's moving faster than anything we've tracked before. For months, astronomers believed it was just another cold, wandering object drifting through deep space, something harmless, something routine. But then the data changed suddenly. The object began accelerating on its own. No gravity assist, no obvious reason, no natural explanation. And that's when the real questions began. Tonight, we're going to unravel everything the space agencies will eventually have to admit. What this object is, why it's moving like it's alive, and why some scientists are now whispering a word they never thought they'd use in their careers. Mothership. Now relax, settle in, let your mind breathe a little. This story moves slowly, the way deep space does, and you'll want to follow it from the very beginning. It starts with something simple, a blip on a sky survey, something barely brighter than background noise, something no one cared about. But the first person who noticed it, an intern scanning time-lapse images, said the same thing everyone is saying now. It wasn't supposed to be there. The object came from far below the orbital plane, from the dark, empty region under our solar system where almost nothing should pass, and it wasn't following the curve of gravity like a comet or an asteroid. It was climbing, rising, as if it was choosing a path rather than being pulled into one. At first, they assumed it was a glitch, a sensor anomaly, maybe even a mislabeled frame from another region of the sky. But then they checked the backups, then the independent observatories, then the radar pings. Everything matched. Something enormous, cold and silent was coming up toward the sun from a direction nothing natural should ever come from. The first trajectory model said it would pass harmlessly, just another interstellar visitor, slingshot around the sun and vanish back into the dark. But the models were wrong, because 3 weeks later, the object changed speed. Not gradually, instantly, as if it decided to. That one moment is when the tone of the entire mission control room changed. Quiet curiosity turned into a kind of slow, heavy fear, the kind that makes people lean in closer without realizing it. Nobody said the word artificial, but they were thinking it, because nature doesn't press a gas pedal. When they zoomed in with deep field telescopes, something even stranger appeared. The object wasn't perfectly round. It wasn't rugged like an asteroid. And it wasn't shedding dust like a comet. Its silhouette had angles, not random ones, deliberate ones, symmetrical, repeated, and the edges glowed faintly, with a thin trace of blue and red light that pulsed at rhythmic intervals, like breath. You can already feel it, right? That quiet shift inside you, the instinctive part of your mind whispering that this thing isn't just wandering through space. It's coming somewhere. And in the next part of this story, we'll follow what NASA saw when they pointed infrared arrays directly at it, and why the readings made them stop the scans altogether. Infrared should have told them everything. Heat signatures don't lie, not in space. Even the coldest objects glow a little when you look deep enough. Even dead rocks carry the faint warmth of sunlight they absorbed millions of miles away. But when NASA turned the infrared array toward the object, it came back empty. No warmth, no reflection, no trace of energy that belonged to anything natural. It was as if the object was swallowing light instead of reflecting it. One engineer described it like a shadow pretending to be a solid thing. Another compared the readings to scanning the silhouette of a mountain that had somehow learned to erase its own heat. Objects that big cannot be that dark. That was the second moment. People in the control room got quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, but heavy. The kind where everyone pretends they're just verifying data, but really they're waiting for someone else to say what they're too scared to. And as the sensors recalibrated, as the algorithms recomputed, as the analysts huddled around the main screen, the object did something nothing expected. It flashed, not bright, not explosive, not chaotic, just a tiny line of light along its edge, a soft blue arc, like someone tracing a fingertip across a knife. Then another, almost like a signal. It didn't match solar reflections. It didn't match cosmic rays. It didn't match any known artifact from imaging software. And it repeated every 13 seconds. 13, not 12, not 14. 13, a prime number. People like to pretend scientists never panic, that they sit calmly behind screens and treat everything like a puzzle to solve. But that's not what happened here. Because prime numbers don't occur accidentally in coherent patterns. Somewhere in that room, someone whispered, "This might be structured." That's the moment the lid came off the whole thing. Phone calls, encrypted channels, private briefings, air-gapped systems brought online. And all while the object kept rising from below the solar system like something waking up from centuries of sleep. But the strangest part wasn't the flashes. It wasn't the angles along the hull. It wasn't the sudden acceleration. It was the movement itself. Every natural object curves. Every comet bows to gravity. Every asteroid loops and stumbles on its way through space. But this thing moved like it was following an invisible rail, steady, precise, as if it was riding a guided path older than our planets. Seriously, imagine seeing something the size of a mountain move the way a drone moves. No wobble, no drift, just perfect, intentional motion. Telescopes across the world began catching glimpses of its outline, different observatories on different continents, all reporting the same thing. It wasn't just big, it was wide, like a flattened disk fused with jagged, spire-like structures along the back, the silhouette of something built, not broken. Some researchers said it resembled a ship. Others said it looked more like a station. A few said it didn't look like anything we have language for. All we know is that it kept rising slowly, quietly, toward the region of space where Earth's orbital path would eventually align, and as it got closer to the sun, something impossible happened. The object didn't warm up. Everything in the solar system heats when approaching our star. Ice melts, rocks glow, dust becomes plasma. But the object stayed cold, perfectly cold, almost like it wanted to stay hidden even as it moved directly into the light. The first radio anomaly didn't come from NASA. It didn't come from ESA, JAXA, or any major space agency. It came from a small observatory in the foothills of the Chilean Andes, a place that usually studies the faint hum of distant quasars, not mysterious deep space intruders slipping into our solar system. Just after 2 a.m. local time, the array picked up a signal so faint the system almost filtered it out as noise. Almost. But one intern, just one, noticed something strange. The noise wasn't random. It had rhythm, not like music, not like Morse code, more like a heartbeat, but stretched out across space. A steady pulse, repeating every 41 seconds. 41, another prime number. The intern flagged it for review, expecting it to be dismissed. Instead, the lead astronomer froze when he saw the Fourier analysis. Natural cosmic noise is messy, a fuzzy soup of frequencies. This wasn't messy. This was clean, too clean. The pattern formed a distinct shape on the graph, a wave that rose sharply, held for a moment, then dropped back into silence, almost reminiscent of a radar ping waiting for a return echo. By sunrise, the data had quietly made its way to NASA. By noon, observatories across 3 continents confirmed the same pulse, faint, distant, but unmistakably synchronized with the object rising from beneath the solar system. And here's where it gets stranger. The signal wasn't coming from the object. It was bouncing off it. Imagine a mountain-sized thing covered in some kind of surface that responds to radio waves not chaotically like rock or ice, but consistently like a structure designed to be noticed or scanned. But then came the twist no one expected. As the pulses continued, the object began to rotate. Not fast, not wild, just a slow, deliberate turn timed almost perfectly with the rhythm of the signal. A rotation that revealed something no one was prepared to see. Along the underside of the object, light began to scatter differently, as if the surface were layered, shifting, adjusting. The edges caught faint sunlight and refracted it into thin red and blue streaks, rippling like veins. Astronomers watched the silhouette sharpen, revealing long, geometric ridges running across the hull, perfectly straight, perfectly parallel, perfectly unnatural. One senior analyst reportedly said, "If that's a comet, then I'm a dolphin." The object, still cold as deep space, accelerated again just a fraction, just enough to break another model. Except this time, the acceleration wasn't random. It pointed directly toward a point in space, a location just weeks ahead of Earth's orbit. Not a collision path, not a threat trajectory, more like a rendezvous. Engineers debated for hours. Physicists argued. Military analysts requested access. But as the numbers ran and the trajectory refined, there was no denying it. Whatever this object was, and wherever it came from, it was choosing its path with intention. As the world slept, a new stream of data quietly reached NASA's Deep Space Network, a set of enormous radio dishes spread across California, Spain, and Australia. These antennas are built to track distant spacecraft like Voyager and New Horizons. But tonight, they were aimed at something far stranger. For hours, the readings were steady, predictable, almost calm. Then, at 3:14 UTC, the object released a faint burst of energy, tiny, but sharp enough to register as a spike on every single dish around the world. Not explosive, not dangerous, more like a short, deliberate flash. The spike resembled something NASA engineers recognized immediately. A course correction, but not a natural one. Natural objects, comets, asteroids, icy bodies drift, tumble, or break apart. They don't stop. they don't turn, and they definitely don't correct themselves. This correction was precise, too precise. It altered the object's angle by just a few degrees, aligning it perfectly with a corridor of space that leads directly to Earth's orbital path in the coming weeks. Still not a collision, still not an impact, but unmistakably intentional. Inside Mission Control, one observer whispered, "Something down there is steering this thing." But the deeper they looked, the more impossible it became, because the object wasn't giving off heat. It wasn't venting gas. It wasn't burning fuel. No engines were detected. No plume. No radiation spikes, yet it moved with the control of a spacecraft while behaving like a silent, ancient rock, almost like a machine that forgot it was a machine. Hours later, the James Webb Space Telescope received clearance for what scientists call a risky orientation shift. Webb is delicate. It can't point too close to the sun or flip too aggressively. But for this target, NASA made an exception. The telescope slowly turned, its golden mirrors aligned, and for the first time, Webb stared directly at the deep space visitor rising from below the solar system. What came back wasn't an image, not at first. It was a spectrum, a complex fingerprint of the object's surface, just light broken into data. But that data caused the team to freeze. There were no signatures of ice, none of carbon, none of minerals common in comets, none of the dust trails typical of objects entering the inner solar system. Instead, Webb detected something completely unexpected. Long, repeating structures thousands of meters wide, made of an unknown reflective material that didn't absorb light the way rock or metal should. The spectral lines were too clean, too uniform, too engineered. One scientist compared it to scanning the outside of a skyscraper, smooth panels, repeating segments and edges that shouldn't exist on natural objects. But that wasn't the strangest part. Buried deep in the data was a faint thermal reading. Not hot, not warm, not even room temperature, but colder than the surrounding space. The object wasn't absorbing heat. It was rejecting it, like something designed to hide, or wait, or sleep. NASA analysts began to ask the question they'd been avoiding since day one. Is this really a comet, or something that was built? The answer wasn't clear. Not yet. But then Webb captured one more detail, a reflection pattern that repeated every few minutes. A flicker, almost like movement, but inside the structure. As if something within the object was shifting, not breaking, not collapsing, just adjusting, almost like turning on. NASA analysts stayed glued to their screens, replaying the Webb data over and over. Something inside the object was moving faint, rhythmic, too steady to be a glitch. Even stranger, the reflections followed a looping pattern, not random, not chaotic, almost mechanical. But the object itself stayed perfectly silent. No radio noise, no thermal output, no rotation wobble. It simply drifted through space with the calmness of something that didn't have to fight physics the way everything else does. To make sense of it, NASA brought back archived data from the first two interstellar objects ever found, Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. Comparing them to 3I, Atlas felt like comparing a bicycle, a car, and a completely different species of machine. Oumuamua accelerated without reason, no gas venting, no tail, no detectable heat. Borisov acted like a normal comet: dust, ice, gas, everything expected. But 3I, Atlas, didn't fit either category. It wasn't shedding anything, it wasn't slowing, it wasn't spinning, it wasn't heating, it was coasting, almost like it already knew its destination. And this time, unlike with Oumuamua, we caught it early, well before perihelion, well before it entered the inner solar system. That gave scientists a chance to piece together its origins. That's when something surprising emerged. Its trajectory didn't look chaotic or random like most interstellar objects. Instead, it was clean, smooth, mathematically elegant, and its angle of approach was unusual, extremely unusual. It came from beneath the solar system, rising upward like something that had been waiting in the dark below the sun's gravitational plane. This region is almost never used by wandering interstellar debris, but it is the kind of corridor a spacecraft would take if it wanted to avoid collisions and radiation. Some analysts quietly proposed that 3I, Atlas, could have been drifting like this for thousands, maybe millions of years. Not active, not broadcasting, just moving through space like an ancient relic on autopilot. But if that were true, why was it waking up now? The spectral readings became stranger with each pass. Webb picked up thin bands along the object's surface, not cracks, not fractures, but smooth lines that ran end to end across its body, lines that looked like panels. Some sections even reflected starlight in perfect symmetry, as if they were crafted, not formed by nature. And then came the suspicious detail that made everyone in the lab stop talking at once. The object showed signs of internal cavities, empty spaces layered deep inside, shaped like chambers or halls. Natural objects don't have that. Asteroids are rubble, comets are ice and dust. Even icy moons have chaotic, irregular interiors. But 3I Atlas looked hollow. Not completely, not like a balloon, more like a megastructure built with sections, chambers, corridors, walls. The kind of architecture you'd expect from a machine built to travel impossible distances. Some analysts proposed it could be a derelict craft, ancient, drifting between stars long after its power source died, a relic of something long gone. Others propose something far more unsettling. What if it isn't a relic? What if it's dormant? For hours, the team debated possibilities: natural, artificial, hybrid, unknown. None of them truly fit, but all of them felt too small for what the data suggested. While they debated, the object passed a threshold. No one expected it to cross so soon. It accelerated again, not violently, not suddenly, just a gentle shift, barely noticeable, like a sleeping giant rolling over. But that tiny motion changed everything. Its projected course now aligned perfectly with a future section of Earth's orbit. Not a collision, not even a near miss, more like an interception point. A meeting point, and for the first time since the discovery began, NASA officials locked the room, muted outside channels, and classified the trajectory report. The public wouldn't see this update. Not yet. Whatever this thing was, whatever it carried inside, the moment 3I, Atlas, changed velocity even slightly, every deep space tracking system across NASA, ESA, and the Japanese Space Agency snapped to attention. Small accelerations aren't unusual for comets. Outgassing pushes them like little rocket engines. Dust jets can redirect motion. Even sunlight pressure can nudge tiny objects. But this wasn't tiny, and it wasn't venting anything. And the change was too clean, too smooth, almost mathematically controlled. The internal logs from the Deep Space Network marked the moment with a note that sounded almost hesitant. Is greater than observed. Non-gravitational acceleration not consistent with comet-like activity. They had written that line before once in 2017 when Oumuamua pulled its bizarre disappearing act. But this time the object was larger, older, and behaving with far more precision. Scientists plotted the motion again, adjusting for uncertainties. The line on the map didn't flicker, it didn't wiggle. It carved a perfect arc toward the plane of Earth's orbit months from now. Not a collision course, not an intercept with a satellite, just a clean alignment like rendezvous math. And every person in the room felt the same quiet pressure building in their chest. This wasn't random. Even the temperature readings made no sense. As the object moved closer to the sun, it should have begun to warm even slowly. Everything warms. Even chunks of frozen nitrogen heat up in sunlight. But 3I, Atlas, remained cold, colder than expected. Almost as if it had a thermal shield that was regulating its temperature, absorbing heat, releasing none. A passive ship drifting through space would have warmed up. A comet would have exploded without gassing. A rocky asteroid would have shown a surface glow. But this thing stayed hidden in the dark. The strangest part came from the JWST polarization measurements. When light bounces off surfaces, especially rough ones, it scatters in predictable ways. Astronomers can tell what an object is made of, how dusty it is, how smooth it is, even if it's metal or stone. But 3I, Atlas, did something unprecedented. It scattered light in two directions at once, as if the surface had layered materials, not random ones, but engineered panels with different reflective properties. One layer absorbed, the other glinted sharply. Natural objects don't do that. Satellites do, spacecraft do, megastructures do. NASA tried to keep these findings quiet, but the leaks started trickling through anyway. Small posts on obscure astronomy forums, snippets of spectral graphs, someone accidentally uploaded for a few seconds, then deleted. One graph showed a repeating spike too regular to be noise, too clean to ignore. The comment below it only said, is greater than, this object is not inert. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers began noticing something unnerving. The object didn't tumble. Every rock in space tumbles. Every comet spins. Every asteroid wobbles like a drunk dancing in the dark. But 3I Atlas held its attitude fixed, steady like a ship maintaining orientation. Even spacecraft lose orientation after thousands of years, but this object hadn't. It rotated only once, gently, almost gracefully, before returning to the exact same facing, pointing the same strange reflective side toward the Sunday, as if it wanted sunlight to hit that side, as if it needed it, as if it were calibrating something. This triggered a deeper analysis. What if the acceleration wasn't propulsion? What if it was the result of something inside? Activating, a dormant system warming up, a navigation core restoring power, a long sleep finally ending? One scientist at ESA compared it to an ancient lighthouse relighting its fire after centuries of silence. But NASA's internal speculation went darker. If this object were dormant, truly dormant, then the trigger likely wasn't chance. Maybe it woke because it crossed into the inner solar system. Maybe it woke because it sensed radiation levels changing. Or maybe it woke because it detected us, our satellites, our radio networks, our constant electromagnetic chatter. A civilization advanced enough to launch an object across interstellar space wouldn't be confused by Earth's signals. It would interpret them and possibly respond. As this possibility spread across mission control, the atmosphere shifted. The room didn't feel like a cluster of scientists anymore. It felt like a room full of people waiting for something to answer back. And then, right as the object crossed the orbit of Mars, it brightened. Not like a comet, not like a reflection, but like a pulse, a heartbeat. A single flash, faint but structured, lasting just under a second. A flash that Webb, Hubble, and 2 ground-based observatories all caught at the same moment. NASA ran it through every system they had. It wasn't a star flare. It wasn't cosmic noise. It wasn't a sensor artifact. It was real. It was directed. And it was the first intentional-looking signal the object had ever produced. It wasn't wandering anymore. It was moving with purpose, quiet, suspenseful, deliberate. The kind of pacing that keeps viewers glued while still relaxing them. The flash from 3-Eye Atlas wasn't bright enough to alarm the public. In fact, it was invisible to every regular telescope on Earth. Only the sensitive detectors aboard Webb, Hubble, Subaru, and a handful of radio arrays picked it up. But the sequence behind that flash, that's what stunned every scientist involved, because the light curve wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't scattered sunlight. It was shaped. Within that 1-second pulse, the brightness rose in 3 steps evenly spaced, perfectly measured and separated by identical time intervals. No natural process produces that kind of uniformity. 3 clean increments, like someone turning up a dimmer switch exactly 3 times, or like a system waking itself up, layer by layer. NASA attempted to classify the signature, comparing it to known natural events, but every match failed. The spectral lines were too narrow, too controlled. One researcher finally said what everyone else was thinking is greater than this looks engineered. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers watching the skies noticed something they couldn't explain. The object's apparent brightness started to fluctuate every few hours, not randomly, not chaotically, but rhythmically, a slow, consistent dim, then a slow, consistent rise, a breathing pattern, as if the object inhaled light, then exhaled darkness. On forums, people joked about it, comparing it to a sleeping giant, a drifting star whale, even a forgotten alien ark, but the professionals were unsettled, because that breathing meant one thing. The object's reflectivity was changing, and reflectivity only changes when a surface changes. Panels opening, panels closing, adaptive shielding, adjusting to new radiation levels. One astronomer at the European Southern Observatory whispered the idea that no one wanted to say aloud is greater than, this might be the first time we're watching something self-regulate. And still there was no outgassing, no debris, no thermal signature, not even a whisper of heat. Whatever this thing was doing, it was doing it silently and efficiently in a way that made human engineering look primitive. That's when the Deep Space Network logged something even more bizarre. For nearly 40 minutes after the pulse, a faint microwave band signal echoed across 3 antennas. Not strong enough to decode, not even strong enough to classify, but each antenna, located thousands of miles apart, picked up the same faint rise at the same moment. A whisper, a murmur, a kind of presence in the electromagnetic noise. If comets could whisper, the universe would sound like static. But this wasn't static. This was intentional faintness, just below the threshold where you could understand it, just above the line where you could dismiss it, like something stretching after a long sleep, testing its environment, testing us. And the timing made everything worse, because right after that faint microwave ripple faded, the object shifted another tiny, gentle acceleration that no comet should be able to do. Not random, not weathered by solar wind, not kicked by dust jets. This one lined up almost perfectly with the ecliptic Earth's orbital plane. Not a collision course, not a threat, not a dive toward the planet, but the kind of shift a spacecraft makes when it wants to enter a more predictable, stable environment. There was now a pattern emerging. Pulse, reflectivity change, microwave whisper, course correction, as if the object had a checklist, a startup sequence, a wake-up protocol. NASA didn't say this publicly, they couldn't, but behind closed doors, teams began treating the object less like a comet and more like a vessel. That's when Webb produced the most unsettling data of all. The telescope caught a moment, just a fraction of a second, when one side of the object briefly glinted sharper than the rest. Reflectivity soared, then stabilized. Running a surface model produced a rough outline, a flat, extended region, straight edges, sharply symmetrical, no natural erosion, no chaotic fracture lines. One scientist froze when the shape appeared on the screen. It wasn't perfect, but it resembled something unmistakable, a megastructure panel. The closest analog we had wasn't a rock or comet. It was a heat shield, or a solar sail, or hull plating, but bigger, older, thicker, almost fossilized. If this were a mothership, this could have been an exterior plate. If this were a probe, this could have been a sensor wing. If this was something else, this might be its skin. Even worse, after this glint was captured, the brightness fluctuations stopped, like the object had completed some kind of inspection cycle. No one in mission control spoke for a long time after that moment. Some of them later said it felt like watching an eye slowly open in the darkness, then lock onto you. And somewhere inside every expert in that room, the same quiet fear settled. If this thing is waking up, what happens when it is fully awake? As the data poured in and the surface models updated, something unusual began happening behind the scenes. Agencies that normally argued, competed, or outright ignored one another suddenly began syncing their schedules. Meetings between NASA, ESA, JAXA, and even more unusual agencies started happening quietly at odd hours, behind secured channels, without public explanation. The shift was subtle. At first, fewer public updates, more no comments, more delayed releases. But the reason was simple. Every agency was afraid they were looking at the same conclusion, and none of them wanted to say it first. What finally forced their hand wasn't another pulse or another course shift, but something far stranger. The object began to interact with sunlight, not reflect it, not scatter it, not just glint occasionally, interact with it. Solar photons striking its surface didn't bounce back the way they should. Instead, the reflected light arrived in fragments, as if it passed through something thin, layered, or partially transparent. Almost like sunlight passing through a set of shutters, or the slats of a massive, ancient structure. This wasn't a smooth rock. This wasn't a melting comet core. This wasn't dust-covered ice. It was textured, layered, segmented. And for the first time, instruments detected variation in the object's silhouette, tiny changes in its outline, as if sections of it were shifting position. Slow, rhythmic, mechanical, the kind of motion a structure makes when it's stabilizing itself, or orienting, or scanning. That's when a senior analyst studying high-resolution frames noticed something disturbing. Every time the object shifted, it did so when the sun aligned behind it. Not random timing, not coincidence. It moved deliberately into the sun's glare, where telescopes struggled to capture clean data. A blind spot strategy. For the first time, whispers started circulating inside observatories. What if it doesn't want to be seen clearly? And then something happened that pushed even the skeptics into silence. The Deep Space Network tracked a faint change in the object's rotation, a slowing, then a stabilization, then a perfect lock. The object oriented itself in a way no natural body ever does. Its broadest face turned directly toward Earth, not by accident, not due to gravity, not because of solar wind. It was a controlled reorientation. If you were drifting alone in deep space and you suddenly decided to look at something, this is exactly what you would do. Somewhere in mission control, someone muttered, "is greater than it's looking back." Almost immediately, flux in the radio noise increased. Nothing clear, nothing decoded, just an elevated hiss, a shift in the background, like the static of a radio being tuned too slowly. But the most chilling detail, the noise aligned almost perfectly with Earth's rotation, rising and falling in sync with our planet's position relative to the object. It was tracking Earth's movement, not approaching us, not signaling directly, not making contact, just watching, like a quiet observer taking its time, gathering data, learning the patterns of our star, our orbit, our magnetic field. And the longer it held that orientation, the more it seemed to study. That's when the public sky watchers noticed something unnerving. Stars directly behind the object, stars that should have been visible, dimmed softly, as if passing behind a partially transparent film. Not fully blocked, not fully visible. Something on or around the object was bending light. Not enough to be gravitational lensing, not enough to be a dust halo, just enough to look engineered, like a massive frame covered in an ultra-thin, semi-transparent material, or a structure with layered surfaces that distort the view slightly. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't smooth, it wasn't simple, and it wasn't dead. It was complex, massive, and slowly, very slowly becoming active. Scientists argued over the possibilities. Is it adjusting to solar radiation? Is it masking its true shape? Is it preparing a maneuver? Is it scanning Earth? Or is this what it looks like when something ancient begins to wake up? For days, The object hovered in that uncanny stillness, rotating just enough to keep its broad face locked on Earth. No more pulses, no sudden bursts of acceleration, nothing aggressive. Just that enormous, silent presence, drifting beneath the solar system like a creature waiting in deep water. But while the object stayed quiet, Earth did not. Inside mission control rooms, arguments broke out. Should they send a probe? Should they illuminate it with radar? Should they attempt a low-frequency transmission? Nobody wanted to be the one who poked it. Is a price, and yet no one wanted to sit in the dark either. The tension grew when JWST's infrared data revealed something new, patches on the object's surface that were warming slowly, steadily, even though the object was too far from the sun for natural heating. Artificial heating, or energy buildup, or activation of something dormant. The heated areas weren't random blotches. They formed a pattern. A long vertical band along one edge, 3 circular nodes along its center, a faint horizontal strip near its base. Engineers stared at the shape in disbelief because it resembled something familiar. A panel, a hatch, a door, something that opens. Still, no one dared say the word out loud. Not yet. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers were noticing another strange detail. Lens flares in their images were beginning to curve around the object in a way they shouldn't. This wasn't a camera glitch. The light around the object was warping not enough to be dramatic, but enough to make the stars shimmer unnaturally near its edge. It looked like something partially cloaked by a thin distortion field. Almost like it was wrapped in a membrane too faint to see directly, but visible when starlight hit the edges. Whatever this object was, it wasn't naked rock, it wasn't drifting ice, and it definitely wasn't behaving like any comet in the record books. In the following days, NASA released a quiet update, short, vague, careful. They downplayed the heating patterns, blamed instrument noise, and avoided mentioning anything about the orientation lock. But the astronomers who tracked it every night knew better, because the object's position relative to Earth began to shift again, not in a dangerous trajectory, but in a purposeful one. It slowly tilted its orientation, rotating just enough to line up perfectly with Earth's magnetic field. Not our orbit, not our sunlight, not our gravitational center, our magnetic axis. It was reading our planet's field like a map or a heartbeat. And then, the most disturbing detail yet. Radio telescopes began picking up ultra-low frequency vibrations, waves so deep humans couldn't hear them. They weren't messages, not patterns, not signals. They were scans, as if the object was sweeping the solar system with something like sonar. And every time it pulsed, something in Earth's atmosphere responded. Minor fluctuations in our magnetosphere. No danger, just slight wobbles like the world shivered for a moment. Just enough to prove the connection. The object was interacting with our planet directly. Some scientists whispered another theory, one nobody wanted to say out loud in the press, is greater than it's not studying Earth, it's verifying Earth, verifying something about our atmosphere, our field strength, our chemical signatures, our radio noise, our energy output, as if checking off variables on a list. And just when the world thought the situation couldn't get stranger, JWST captured something that sent a ripple of panic through the scientific community. A thin, vertical line of light appeared along the object's warm band, dim at first, then slightly brighter, not sunlight, not reflection, but internal illumination. It looked like a seam that was beginning to open. This wasn't arrival. This wasn't passive drift. This was a process, activation, transformation, or worse, preparation. The seam didn't snap open all at once. It began with the faintest shimmer, a thin glow tracing the outline of the warm vertical band like a fuse being lit from the inside. Every telescope on Earth turned toward it. Every observatory locked onto that line. Even amateur astronomers sitting in backyards with shaky tripods gasped when they zoomed in and saw it. The object wasn't changing shape, it was revealing shape. The faint glow brightened, sharpening at the edges until it formed a perfect razor-straight slit running nearly half the object's height. No natural process produces a line that precise. Someone in a control room whispered the word no one wanted to hear. Mechanical. The glow pulsed once, then again, then a third time stronger. The slit widened by a fraction of an inch, then stopped. But even that tiny movement caused a measurable ripple in electromagnetic readings across half the planet. Sensors in Canada, Alaska, Southern Europe, and unexpected regions like Western Africa picked up a strange distortion, a low rolling tremor in the ionosphere. Technically harmless, emotionally devastating, because whatever was inside that seam was starting to breathe. Not air vibration, frequency, a soft, pulsing hum that instruments could detect but humans couldn't hear. Every pulse matched the fluctuating glow along the slit, synchronized, rhythmic, almost biological. It felt less like machinery warming up and more like something alive inside the giant object, stretching. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the light. It was the shadows. Every time the slit glowed, JWST picked up faint silhouettes behind it, long, parallel structures inside the object, like ribs in a chest cavity or beams in a cathedral, too evenly spaced to be random geological fractures, too uniform to be natural, too large to make sense. If this thing was hollow, even partially, then it was built, engineered, planned, constructed by something that understood symmetry and strength on a level far beyond us. Meanwhile, radio observatories detected a new pattern embedded in the hum, not a message, but a scan repetition, almost like a system performing diagnostics after waking from a long sleep. Some scientists suggested it was powering up. Others claimed it could be stabilizing itself after the 3 mysterious hits it had taken earlier in its trajectory. A few whispered a darker theory. It's checking if the environment is safe before opening all the way. As the slit continued its slow, incremental widening, the object reacted to light differently. A soft, mist-like haze began forming along the edges, not gas, not dust, but ionized particles flickering like fog illuminated by headlights. It drifted outward, curling into the void like breath in cold air. Spectrometers couldn't identify it. Not water vapor, not carbon, not nitrogen, nothing familiar. It was matter behaving in ways the periodic table didn't predict. And then, something subtle but terrifying happened. Every time the slit brightened, stars in the background appeared slightly displaced. Not dramatically, just shifted, bent, like the object was tugging on space-time itself. NASA didn't release that data, but the leak spread quietly among astronomers. Is greater than. The object isn't just massive, it's generating a localized gravitational lens effect, meaning whatever was inside wasn't small, it wasn't quiet, and it wasn't dormant anymore. Then, without warning, the pulsing stopped, the glow dimmed, the haze froze, the slit held perfectly still, as if the entire structure was waiting, listening, deciding. That stillness, that eerie, impossible silence, lasted for nearly a full minute, right up until the moment the slit flashed with a burst so bright telescopes temporarily lost tracking. And when their sensors recovered, the seam was no longer a narrow slit. It had opened 2 full meters, enough for something inside to see out, enough for something inside to come alive. What the telescopes captured next pushed fear into every agency monitoring it. When the telescopes regained their footing, the giant object no longer looked dormant. The 2-meter opening wasn't just an opening, it was an eye, or something trying to be one. The glow inside stabilized into a soft, steady radiance. The color shifting between deep blue and pale violet. It wasn't chaotic like heat or plasma. It was calm, controlled, almost intentional. As the light reached full intensity, the interior of the slit revealed itself more clearly. Rows of parallel structures, the ribs now, gleamed faintly, reflecting the internal glow like polished metallic bone. Between them, vast hollow chambers stretched inward, too deep for sensors to map. You could fit a skyscraper inside one of them and still have room to spare. And in the farthest visible recess, something moved. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then, the shadow shifted, sliding against the internal wall with a slow, fluid, unsettling precision. It didn't match the object's rotation. It didn't drift like dust. It adjusted itself as if repositioning. Every astrophysicist who saw the footage described the same sinking feeling. That wasn't physics. That wasn't debris. That reacted. But the strangest part wasn't the movement. It was what happened to the stars behind it. Each time the dark shape shifted, stars in the background warped, bending ever so slightly, as if the creature or mechanism inside the object had its own gravitational field. That alone would have been enough to trigger emergency reviews. But then came the pulses. Small at first, barely noticeable, faint vibrations rippling through radio bands, measured not in sound but in timing, perfect timing. The pulses came in pairs, separated by an exact interval. 1.337 seconds, repeating, never drifting. Signals with perfect timing rarely occur in nature. Signals with perfect timing that shift frequency in sync with internal movement never occur in nature. SETI attempted to decode it, but instead of a message, they discovered a pattern, a ping, a ranging signal, like a submarine sending sonar into the dark. Only this sonar wasn't bouncing off anything. It was searching, looking, scanning, measuring what kind of environment it had awakened into. Then a new detail emerged, one that raised alarms across multiple agencies. Each pulse caused the slit to brighten, but not evenly. The right side brightened faster than the left, suggesting asymmetric internal systems may be damaged, may be incomplete. Remember the 3 hits 3I Atlas took weeks earlier? The ones everyone assumed were random collisions with debris? Now analysts began to wonder if those hits didn't damage the exterior, but disturbed whatever was sleeping inside. Because after each internal pulse, new tremors were detected along the object's outer shell, tiny vibrations, like pressure building behind a door. And then the object changed behavior again. Slowly, quietly, it began rotating, not freely, not drifting, turning, aligning itself. The rotation wasn't random, it was targeting a specific orientation relative to the solar system. Star charts showed the alignment vector matched Earth's orbital position from 3 months in the future. In other words, the object was turning its eye toward where Earth would be, not where it was now. Still silent, still glowing, still opening. But now, aiming. This wasn't a rock. This wasn't a comet. This wasn't debris. Something was waking up deep inside that megastructure. Something big enough to bend light. Something smart enough to scan the solar system. Something patient enough to wait until the timing was perfect. The rotation continued for hours, steady and unhurried, like a clock hand sliding into place. But even as it moved, astronomers noticed something far more disturbing happening around it. The space behind the object, the natural star field, was fading, not blocked, fading, like the stars were losing brightness the closer they were to the structure's outline. Telescopes adjusted exposure, filters, calibrations, but the phenomenon stayed the same. It was as if the object wasn't just sitting in space. It was draining something from it. Photons didn't behave normally. Radio waves passing behind it lost coherence. Even the cosmic microwave background, the faint leftover glow from the birth of the universe, dipped in intensity around the megastructure. Nothing in science behaves like that. Nothing natural. To the public, the official explanation was light interference. But behind closed doors, the astrophysics teams agreed on something quietly. Space is folding near it. Not violently, not like a black hole, but like something massive was testing the fabric of its surroundings. As the rotation neared completion, the slit widened just a bit more, enough for new details to emerge. Along the edges of the opening, faint geometric lines began to appear, glowing with a soft silver-blue hue. The lines weren't cracks, they weren't damage, they were patterns, repeating sequences, perfect symmetry. Some resembled fractals, others looked like mirrored spirals, and a few had ratios that matched deep mathematical constants, phi, tau, and others barely known outside high-level theoretical physics. Engineers started running comparisons. What they found pushed the situation into a new level of seriousness. The patterns matched similar symbols recorded in 2017 when Oumuamua passed through the solar system, and they matched almost perfectly subsurface carvings found on meteorites that had landed on Earth decades earlier. Everyone dismissed those carvings as coincidence at the time, but not now. Not when the same patterns were now glowing on the surface of a 20-kilometer object rising out of interstellar space. The deeper telescopes peered, the more intentional it looked, like a language, a code, a blueprint written across the hull of something older than Earth. Then came another shift. A temperature spike, but only for a fraction of a second. Too fast to measure precisely, but enough for the object's internal glow to ripple like something inside had flexed or breathed or powered up a new system. Sensors recorded a sudden drop in the local particle field, charged dust, interstellar ions, solar particles. Everything thinned, almost as if the megastructure was pulling matter inward or pushing something outward we couldn't detect. That's when the first low-frequency hum was detected, barely audible. Below human hearing range, but powerful enough to vibrate through satellite panels. It didn't sound mechanical, it sounded alive, like a heartbeat buried somewhere deep inside a metal giant drifting toward awareness. The hum repeated every few minutes, slightly louder, slightly clearer, almost like a creature adjusting to a new environment. A planetary astrophysicist listening to the processed signal described it with a nervous laugh. This feels like something learning to wake up. The solar system reacted too. Jupiter's magnetic field twitched. The solar wind diverted. Saturn's rings vibrated by a microscopic amount. And through all of it, the object kept turning, not aggressively, not chaotically, smoothly, precisely, patiently, as if it had done this before in 100 star systems across 1,000 dead worlds, as if arriving here was part of its route. And yet the most alarming detail wasn't the light or the patterns or the movement. It was that every time it pulsed, the megastructure aligned itself just a little closer to Earth's orbital path. The pulses grew stronger. The internal glow deepened. The faint hum began matching the timing of the earlier 1.337-second pings. Everything was synchronizing, and still no one knew whether it was a ship, a probe, a weapon, or something even stranger that didn't fit into any human category. But what happened next, right before the climax, would finally prove that the object wasn't just accelerating randomly. It had a purpose, and it had just begun revealing it. The hum wasn't the only new behavior. Hours after the pulse sequence stabilized, something subtle, almost invisible, began happening around the megastructure. A faint distortion halo appeared, shimmering like heat waves rising off desert sand. But this wasn't heat. This was space itself, bending. Light along the edges curved in unnatural arcs. Stars behind it smeared into faint streaks, not because of motion, but because something around the object was warping the path of light. At first, the team thought it was gravitational lensing, the same effect produced by black holes and massive galaxies. But the numbers didn't match. The object wasn't heavy enough. It wasn't moving fast enough. And the distortion wasn't random. It followed patterns, circular arcs, straight lines, repeating grids, almost like an invisible shell, a force field or energy layer tightening around the megastructure as it prepared for something. One scientist whispered the phrase that no one wanted to say out loud. This thing is shielding itself. Shielding, preparing, adjusting, activating. Every possibility was worse than the last. As the halo intensified, a new anomaly appeared. Nearby dust and tiny particles stopped drifting naturally. Instead, they froze in place, suspended, unmoving as though trapped in a silent magnetic cage. When the megastructure hummed again, the suspended particles spun in perfect spirals, tracing shapes around the object that no natural force in the solar system could produce. The spirals grew wider, more complex, more coordinated. If you recorded them and sped up the footage, they looked like diagrams, blueprints, 3D schematics of a system the human mind couldn't fully grasp. And on the far side of the object, something even stranger began. Small flashes, barely visible bursts of blue-white light formed in a repeating rhythm. Too precise to be random, too structured to be natural. They resembled communication pulses. But every time Earth's telescopes tried decoding the pattern, it shifted like the object was intentionally avoiding recognition. Not hiding, just waiting. Then came the next escalation, not from the megastructure, but from the space around it. For the first time since the object entered the solar system, it affected the solar wind directly. The stream of charged particles flowing outward from the sun suddenly bent around the object in a smooth arc, as if something unseen was pushing it aside. The bow shock looked like the aerodynamic curve you'd see around a spacecraft entering Earth's atmosphere. Except this wasn't air. This was the vacuum of deep space, meaning one thing. The object wasn't just moving through space. It was manipulating it, controlling its environment, shaping the invisible forces around it with an ease that defied everything humans know about physics. And as days passed, the bending grew even more dramatic. The solar wind formed a bubble around the object, a bubble that expanded slowly, like a breath. Inside this bubble, energy readings dropped, particle density thinned, magnetic fields weakened, as though the megastructure were creating a pocket of calm around itself, a silence in the solar system, an eye in the cosmic storm. Within that artificial calm, the megastructure's glow strengthened. Not bright, not explosive, but steady, intentional, controlled. It illuminated the grooves and symbols on its hull more clearly, carving sharp shadows across its impossible architecture. What the telescopes saw next had scientists leaning back in their seats, whispering curses under their breath. The grooves weren't just symbols or patterns. They were moving, slow, almost invisible, but definitely shifting, as if the structure were rearranging sections of itself, molecule by molecule. The grid lines slid, the spirals rotated, the fractal patterns expanded and contracted like a heartbeat. The object was changing shape, not dramatically, not enough to alarm the public, but enough for experts to agree. What we see now isn't its final form, do we? Of always say, something inside or outside was preparing. But preparing for what? A maneuver? A message? A transformation? Or something far more unsettling, buried beneath every possibility the scientists proposed? Whatever the answer, the megastructure's new behavior raised one final frightening idea. This object didn't just enter the solar system, it was adapting to it. Adapting to the sun, adapting to the planets, adapting to us. And the next phase, which was coming soon, wouldn't be subtle. It wouldn't be quiet. It would be the moment the object finally revealed why it was here. The question wasn't what the megastructure was doing anymore. It was why the solar system was reacting to it. Because just as the object adapted to its surroundings, the surroundings began adapting to it. It started with something small, almost unnoticeable, but impossible to ignore once the data lined up. A faint shift in the orbital path of micrometeorites near the ecliptic. They weren't drifting normally. They weren't following predictable gravitational arcs. Something invisible was tugging at them. Not strong, not violent, just persuasive. Almost like a soft current underwater pulling seaweed in a subtle direction. Every piece of debris the megastructure passed seemed to fall into formation behind it, not crashing into it, not clustering too close, just aligning. Like iron filings arranging themselves on a magnetic field. Even more bizarre, the alignment wasn't random. When the particles settled into place, their distribution formed a pattern, a spiral, that matched the overlapping geometry carved onto the object's hull. It was as if the object projected an invisible influence and space itself followed orders. And still, the public didn't know. Most astronomers didn't know either. Only the teams with access to deep space telemetry noticed something else hidden in the data. The megastructure's speed was no longer stable. Before, it drifted predictably along a massive arc beneath the solar system. Now, the velocity fluctuated by tiny increments, but in ways no natural object should. 0.001% faster, then stable, then 0.004% slower, then stable again. It was micro-thrusting, not enough to change its trajectory dramatically, but just enough to prove it wasn't being moved by outside forces. It was adjusting itself, correcting, reorienting, fine-tuning its path through the darkness. And these adjustments always happened at the same time, right after each faint interior pulse. NASA classified the pulses as electromagnetic echoes. ESA theorized it could be internal cooling or heating cycles. Other labs whispered about controlled reactions, but one pattern stood out. Every pulse occurred exactly 19 minutes and 44 seconds after the previous one. Perfectly timed, never early, never late, like a heartbeat. And the heartbeat was speeding up, not drastically, just by fractions of a second, but enough for the most experienced astrophysicists to break into cold sweats. Because nothing in space has a biological rhythm, unless something alive is involved. And nothing artificial maintains this perfect internal timing unless it's programmed. But living or not, designed or not, the timing itself wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was the resonance. After each pulse, radio antennas on Earth recorded microscopic distortions in the background noise of space, like small ripples in the static. The ripples weren't random, they came in pairs. Every single time. A primary ripple, a secondary echo, as though something out there was answering. But answering what? It didn't take long for a few researchers to notice the echoes didn't behave like reflections or signal bounce backs. They had their own delay, their own rhythm, their own fingerprints, like a second object somewhere farther away responding to the megastructure's pulse with its own, a call and a reply. Scientists ran simulations. They filtered the data. They checked for satellites, solar activity, ionospheric interference, anything. The echoes didn't match anything natural. They didn't match anything human. And the direction of the echoes? Not from the sun, not from any planet, not from the Milky Way's background radiation. The echoes came from deep beneath the ecliptic plane, far below the path 3I Atlas traveled. As if something else, hidden even deeper, was listening. As if the megastructure wasn't alone. As if it had a partner, or a receiver, or a target, or a waiting station. This realization pushed the investigation into a more chilling territory. What if the object drifting toward the inner solar system wasn't here to explore? What if it was here to connect? But with what? And why now? There were whispers of a network, a relay, A system that might span light years with pieces drifting like silent seeds across the galaxy. If that was true, then 3I Atlas wasn't the first to arrive. It was simply the first we noticed. And those signals, those answers recorded in deep space static were a reminder. Whatever is hiding in the dark beneath the solar system, it woke up when the megastructure arrived. The more researchers dug into the megastructure's behavior, the more they realized they weren't the only ones studying it. Space itself seemed to respond. Strange patterns began appearing in the outer solar system, not physical objects, not debris, but subtle distortions in how gravity behaved, like tiny dents in the fabric of space, small but measurable. At first, teams dismissed them as data glitches, then as software issues, then as interference from solar wind, but the patterns didn't match any of those things. Instead, they formed a sequence that lined up perfectly with the megastructure's silent pulses. One pulse, one distortion, another pulse, another distortion. It was too clean to ignore. The distortions weren't random. They created a map, a layout, something like a corridor of invisible markers stretching through the darkness beneath the solar system. Almost like a runway or a docking path. No one dared say that out loud. But the fear behind the scenes was real. A few scientists ran private simulations, off the record, and what they found made them turn off their screens in silence. The distortions lined up like breadcrumb trails, guiding the megastructure toward a very specific region of deep space, a place we've never explored, a place no probe has ever passed through, a region so empty that astronomers barely named it. It was like watching a giant ship being guided toward a harbor one we never knew existed. And still, something felt wrong. Because the deeper the object moved along this invisible path, the more the solar system reacted. The Kuiper Belt showed the first signs. Astronomers noticed several large bodies objects that hadn't moved in millions of years, shifting ever so slightly, as if nudged by a force without mass. When scientists traced those shifts, they found something impossible. The Kuiper Belt wasn't pulling inward. It was bending away from something, as though trying to avoid it, like oil recoiling from heat. But this something wasn't visible, wasn't hot, wasn't emitting radiation. It was just present, a presence that space itself seemed to acknowledge or fear. And just when people thought the data couldn't get stranger, something happened that forced even the most skeptical scientist to rethink everything. The megastructure slowed down, not a random slowdown, not a natural drag, a controlled deceleration, precise, measured, almost gentle. Objects that come from interstellar space never slow down on their own. They move until gravity pulls them or pushes them. They never choose to brake. But this one did, as if it were preparing for something, or approaching something, or aligning with something waiting ahead. Teams tracked the object's new velocity. It was no longer moving like a comet, no longer drifting like a natural body. It was traveling like a vehicle, and with a slowdown came something far more unsettling. The pulses stopped. 27 days of perfect rhythmic signals, and then absolute silence. No heartbeat, no internal hum, no electromagnetic echo, nothing. Silence in deep space is normal, but not after weeks of flawless timing. The sudden stillness felt like the moment before a storm breaks, the feeling animals sense when the air pressure drops and lightning charges the sky. NASA tried to send active radar pings. The object didn't respond. Ground telescopes sharpened their focus. The surface was dimmer now. The glowing plates had cooled. The strange lattice-like structures seemed to retract, pulling inward like a machine powering down. But the most disturbing detail came from rotational analysis. The object wasn't tumbling anymore. It had stabilized perfectly, like it had entered a waiting mode. Or worse, a listening mode. And then, as if on cue, the distortions in deep space shifted, aligning into a new configuration. The breadcrumb trail wasn't a trail anymore. It was forming a boundary, a border, a ring, not physical, not visible to the naked eye, but detectable through gravity and motion. The megastructure drifted toward that invisible ring and stopped, right at the edge, not entering it, not crossing it, just hovering silent and motionless, as if waiting for permission. Scientists stared at the data like they were watching a locked door appear in the middle of the ocean, and something enormous behind it deciding whether to unlock it. The fear inside Mission Control was different now. It wasn't the fear of the unknown. It was the fear of the known. Because whatever was hidden beneath the solar system, whatever was generating the answering echoes, whatever created the invisible ring, knew the megastructure was coming. And now, both of them were waiting. For what? Nobody knew. But every signal, every shift, every distortion whispered the same silent message. The real event hasn't started yet. The moment everything changed was so quiet that most people would have missed it. No explosion, no flash, no shockwave, just a single vibration through space. A low-frequency tremor so subtle that only the deepest senses picked it up. Then the invisible ring, those strange gravitational distortions outlining a hidden boundary, began to twist. Not drifting, not fading, but rotating, like gears slowly turning in a lock. Every instrument monitoring the region spiked at the exact same second. Radar, magnetic fields, infrared, gravitational curves. Even neutrino detector systems that barely react to supernovas lit up like alarms. Whatever this boundary was, whatever made it, whatever slept behind it, was waking up. The megastructure, silent for days, responded instantly. Its plates reactivated, one layer at a time, glowing brighter than they ever had before. The long skeletal limbs extended outward. Panels shifted into new positions. The eerie blue veins along its hull lit up like lightning trapped inside metal. For the first time since entering the solar system, it looked alive. A beam thin as a needle but brighter than a star fired from the object's core and hit the exact center of the invisible ring. The space inside the ring darkened. Not like a shadow, like a hole, a perfect circle of pure emptiness, forming in a place where emptiness already existed. And then it opened, not like a door, more like a mouth. A massive distortion spiraled outward, warping starlight, bending color, pulling the background of space inward like fabric being drawn through a drain. Every planet's orbit registered it. Earth's magnetic field shook. Jupiter's atmosphere rippled. Saturn's rings oscillated like a struck bell. And through that swirling void, something began to emerge. At first, it looked like a dark shape. Then several shapes. Then a structure so enormous that for a moment astronomers thought their measurements were wrong. It wasn't another comet. It wasn't debris. It wasn't even a ship. It was a platform, an artificial continent-sized platform rising slowly from the fracture in space like a city built on top of a black hole. Lights flickered across its underside, massive grids of red and blue patterns matching the megastructure's pulses from earlier. The patterns weren't random. They were instructions. The megastructure responded immediately, aligning itself with the platform like a shuttle approaching its home base after a 1,000-year journey. That's when it hit everyone at once. This thing, this three-eye atlas, this visitor from interstellar space, wasn't here alone. It was the first one through the door. The platform finished, emerging, its edges stretching miles across, then began rotating slowly, creating a stable opening behind it. The void flashed again. Another signal, another pulse. Then something moved behind the opening. Something bigger. Something we couldn't see yet, but could feel the weight of it, the presence of it. The pressure of something ancient crossing into our solar system for the first time. Mission control fell completely silent. No one breathed. No one spoke, because they all understood the same thing. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of one we're not ready for. And the megastructure, the object we thought was the main event, glided into position like a welcome beacon, casting a long blue shadow across the darkness. Whatever was coming next would dwarf everything we'd seen. If you want to stay ahead of whatever this is, hit subscribe and keep watching the next video on your screen. You do not want to miss what happens next.